And we are back for the final segment of the show. NFC teams that I believe are likely to challenge the 49ers in the NFC next year. If you missed the segments before this one, I talked about Russell Wilson and his contract situation, and before that, I mentioned the free agency updates and the rumors. So, if you missed those, you could always catch them after this live episode ends on the GSMC Sports Network channel or the GSMC Podcast Network channel as well. Individual segments or the whole live episode as well. But jumping into the final topic that I have here, a bit of a discussion. Please, this segment is always the one that I like to leave open for opinion. So if you guys have any comments, want to suggest something to me, or just tell me I'm completely wrong and I don't know what I'm talking about, just please do so. Engage in the comments or live in these comments as well. But I have three teams that, in my opinion, are the best ones. But I'm going to start with some honorable mentions. Two honorable mentions, so almost like a top five, but a lot would have to go these teams' way if they were to be real contenders. So starting off our list with the first honorable mention being the Dallas Cowboys. I just think because of the way the NFC East isn't really stacked like the AFC, I think the Cowboys will always be there. They have a great roster, don't get me wrong, but there just always seems to be something, a distraction, an event, or just some actions that just lead up to a moment at the end of the year in the playoffs where it just all falls apart for this team. They're going to have to sign some free agents, get back some of their pieces of the puzzle like Tony Pollard, this free agency, and get him back, make sure that offense is still kept whole. But other than that, it just seems like, there's something going on with them that just always inevitably seems to cost them in the end. So the Cowboys are one, the first honorable mention, because of the NFC not being as strong. The second team I wanted to focus in on, honorable mention, is the Philadelphia Eagles. And again, they're not in a situation like the Cowboys where there's distraction, but over the past, really this past regular season, where it just seems like there was a lot of, internal issues, if you want to say. I can't really think of another way to say it, because there were some on and off problems with the coordinators, Nick Sirianni calling plays, or relying it to Brian Johnson, him taking it away from Brian Johnson because it wasn't really working out. You could just see live on the TV that just the body language of the guy, Jalen Hurts especially, it just seemed like he didn't agree or was just unsatisfied with what they were putting out on offense. Then they gave it to Sirianni, and then defensively, Matt Patricia came in, and they sort of improved, but then towards the end of the year, it wasn't really there. As well as they have some players potentially retiring, trying to replace Kelsey and maybe Lane Johnson. He hasn't been as vocal about it with Kelsey, but he is getting up there in that age range where you start to think about it, finding someone to replace him. But like I just touched on before, some of the pieces on defense I wanted to hone in on, because the secondary had a lot of struggles. What do you do with Bradbury? He really struggled this past season, and other than Darius Slay, he was supposed to be that other lockdown corner. Maybe not to the level of Darius Slay, but he was supposed to give him more than I felt that he did this past season, and it showed in some games. The one that stands out the most is the Seahawks game, where they scored the game-winning touchdown on Bradbury. Their linebackers as well already weren't their strong suit, but they could also be forced to essentially decide between Hassan Reddick and Josh Sweat, because both of them are a year away from free agency, and the Eagles actually granted Hassan Reddick permission to seek a trade. So one of them is most likely about to move one way or the other. They probably feel they can get more for Hassan Reddick, so they are looking for a trade like that. And if anybody knows anything about the Eagles, Howie Roseman, they'll make they are the team probably most likely to make a big trade or make a big move in the offseason or during the draft. So that's something to keep an eye on. They have good players: AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, Jalen Hurts. Jalen Carter is an emerging player on the defensive side of the ball as well. But again, it's just too many factors, too many ifs, buts, things that they could or could not happen that doesn't really make them a top three contender for me. So moving into those top three, the first one at the three spot, I have the Packers. And the Packers are in a situation where they don't have a lot of players that they could lose, but they only have $4 million in cap space. They're the NFL's youngest roster, and they could actually save $21 million of that by releasing David Bakhtiari, help them re-sign players like Darnell Savage, John Runyon, with some extra money. But in the end, there's not too many moving pieces, if buts or maybes that they need to fix. Just this, if you look in the playoffs in their matchup, they played phenomenal against the Cowboys, surprised everybody. Going into Dallas, Jordan Love played almost lights out, as good as you want your playoff debut to be. Then against the 49ers, they basically had them reeling a lot during that game. It was always close, but you always kind of felt that the Packers had a bit more rolling with them. Aaron Jones was having a great game. Jordan Love was having a great game throwing it, converting on third downs. It cost him in the end where he made that rash decision during, again, throwing back across his body towards the middle of the field. But I just think what I saw from them, it just gives me signs that they can only get better, really, because, like I mentioned, they have the NFL's youngest roster. That inexperience hurts them now, but they got that experience, which is the most important thing. Jordan Love has that under his belt now, and I think you saw his confidence building throughout the rest of the year into the playoffs, and it showed. Now I just think he's going to come in at a different level, more familiarity with the offense, especially on the defensive side as well. They have great players: Quay Walker, Rashawn Gary, Jair Alexander, Kenny Clark, and just overall in an NFC North where the biggest threat is the Lions, and they made it into the playoffs as a wild card team, and I can't see why they couldn't do that again this coming season. I think they have a good chance of definitely improving and competing with the 49ers like they did this past season. But that moves me on to the Los Angeles Rams as my second best team, to potentially challenge the 49ers. They have a lot more cap space, $26.3 million, 10 picks in the draft. They finally have a first round pick after so many years that they didn't after that trade with the Lions. And again, another young-ish team, a young defense mostly because of some of the players that came in. Kobe Turner and Byron Young were good pickups in the draft for them, but they definitely need some more help, especially in the secondary. Potentially losing Ahkello Witherspoon and somebody else I can't remember the name of right now, but their secondary was already not great, and potentially losing two starters like them could hurt them, especially in the playoffs with defenses. Help out a lot with anyone trying to make a deep run in the playoffs. But offensively, I think, again, another team that could only get better because they had some questions at running back, wide receiver, and even quarterback. If you weren't sure about Matthew Stafford at the beginning of the year, he only got better with time moving on and them really figuring out what their identity was. The emergence of Kyren Williams. I'm a big fan of Kyren Williams. Good young running back for them. Showed out tremendously this past season. And if it wasn't for that injury, he could have, I just think, had a lot better numbers and a lot crazier numbers than he did. Puka Nacua, goes without saying, an amazing first-year rookie season for him. And with all that talent that those two guys brought, Cooper Kupp was injured for a lot of that time, most of the regular season, and I think he struggled to get back to what he really was, and actually probably didn't get back to any sort of resemblance of what he showed in the past. So I think getting him that time off, getting him healthy fully, really integrating him into that offense and having a whole offseason where you can plan around the weapons that you now know you have, I think could benefit them tremendously, with Matthew Stafford being a question mark of sorts just because he is older, 36 years old. But I think, in a way, that kind of helps him this year. Only this year just because he could have that one last ride, one last really good year where you invest a lot into this one year, and then you can think about maybe trying to replace him. But I really like the Rams, good young team. Offensively, they're in the same division as the 49ers, always competing in that division. They were able to make the playoffs with a lot of uncertainty with this team to start off the year. And I know they lost Raheem Morris, but they've lost coordinators, offensive or defensive, in the past, and it really hasn't harmed them that much. Sean McVay's a great head coach and always refills his staff with great candidates. So I'd like the potential that team has to just always be a thorn in the side for the 49ers. And lastly are the Detroit Lions. Not only did they have a fantastic season, they have a lot of cap space, $46.4 million, 7 draft picks, and no huge free agents this offseason in the next coming months that they need to re-sign. The biggest one being Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. But other than that, Amon-Ra is almost due for his extension, Penei Sewell as well. But they have some time to work it out, and I'm sure they're going to emphasize those two guys to get them extensions before anybody else. And if they do that, they're pretty much set with some of their bigger pieces already potentially being under contract if they get those two guys signed. And they only have to worry about refilling some spots where there were some weaknesses. Like I mentioned, if they lose Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, that'll be an area to fix. But also, I think the cornerbacks were a point that they needed to really improve on, because during the year it never seemed like they had a solid number one. Their number one could have arguably been Cam Sutton, and he was a good signing for them, but I just think they need a top-tier guy in that upper level of defensive backs to compete with just Puka, Cooper Kupp, A.J. Brown, Debo, Brandon Ayuk, a lot of talented receivers, DK Metcalf, a lot of good wide receivers in the NFC, a lot of offensive power. You need good defensive backs, good secondary to combat that. And I just think that combining it with their offensive line that was, in my opinion, the best in football. Their defensive line was very good with Aiden Hutchinson leading the way for them. And if they could draft another pass rusher, I think would benefit them greatly. But you have guys like Jahmyr Gibbs showed out as the year went along, and then now with a full offseason, getting his routines down, training, knows what he's supposed to play like. I think he's one of the players to look out for next season, where he could have one of those really impressive big jumps in the whole league if everything turns out right and they use him a lot more than they did and a lot more frequently in that combination that they have with David Montgomery. But they have everything going for them, a lot of cap space, young roster, and if they re-sign Jared Goff as well, they have that sort of veteran quarterback position guy that could lead this team into a lot of success in the future if they get everything aligned, they get their ducks aligned and execute this offseason, where they learned a lot of rough lessons just in the NFC Championship alone, where they had it won basically, but they just didn't show up in the second half. So that's going to serve them well, I think. Having that taste in their mouth that whole offseason is going to really motivate them, I think, to really be that big challenger for the 49ers and potentially surpass them as well. I think it would be interesting to see how that plays out and if they could take that next step, now being the hunted instead of the hunters in the NFC next season. But that's going to wrap it up for me for this episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I want to thank you guys again for tuning into this live episode and just engaging with any of the segments or the show afterwards if you didn't catch it live. Your engagement means a lot to us, so please Remember to subscribe, like, comment on the show, as well as following us on the many forms of social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, for more of this sort of content. And again, I want to thank you guys. Thank everyone for joining me on this episode. And please join me again tomorrow for more discussion and storylines around the NFL. But for now, I've been your host, Manny Maradiege. Thanking you guys again, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Thanks again.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.